Bill, welcome to the Explorer Poet podcast.
Hey Josh, glad to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as we were just talking about, I recently came across your YouTube channel, Symbols and Signals, and just some of the content that came up, I thought it was really interesting. And it's kind of how I go about finding people is just, who's doing interesting things out there. And so I thought I'd reach out. I really appreciate you jumping on here with me.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad. Let's get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I usually like to talk to people about, obviously, we have a lot of similar interests, but I do want to just spend a little bit of time and actually get to know you a little bit better. What is your background? You're posting about things that are kind of in the philosophical space, the esoteric or mythological space, psychology. But what's your background and what got you into this stuff?
Well, my background has like literally not one thing to do with philosophy or psychology. I actually was a weightlifting. I was an Olympic weightlifting coach for like 8 years, and I still have some. I do some work in that area for a company, private company, and also was a bartender for quite some time. And now I'm actually decided that neither of those things are my passion. I've actually really started getting into engineering, but at the same time, getting into like this engineering and like the electrical thing is I'm really interested in writing and in YouTubing, and it's kind of not like a full time thing. It's just a side thing for like my creativeness. The structure comes from the engineering, the creativeness comes from the writing. But the goal essentially is to be, at least a semi prominent Jungian YouTuber of sorts, a Nietzsche commentator. But also, I would like to write books that are kind of, I guess, mythological and psychodynamic, in nature.
Yeah, absolutely. When you say books, do you mean fiction, nonfiction? What are you
So
thinking?
I actually have a bunch of different drafts because I've got a lot of ideas. But the number one thing is essentially a nonfiction book that is attempting to describe the underlying metaphysics of language and how emotions are markers of that and how they're used to construct ideologies, philosophies, religions, even language itself. I really enjoy Wittgenstein's idea of language games, so I basically expanded that to try to understand all the individual context within all of these belief structures that we use. Which obviously it makes sense that I would like Jung because he essentially tries to do something similar to this. But then also I have a fiction book that's about AI, but totally unrelated to Jung or really anything like that.
Well, it's if you're writing in any kind of creative sense, I think there's going to be some kind of connection to Jung in some way where it's, you're getting the kind of that personal the personal side of kind of the collective. That's the way I think of creativity in essence is like we all have this collective understanding of reality, but then we all experience it on an individual level. And then creativity, art, writing, whatever it may be, is this effort to share with the collective, this is how I'm experiencing it. And when it hits because all of a sudden there's all these other people out there that go, oh yeah, that's how I experience it as well. Yeah, I just found it. Yeah, all this stuff is really interesting to me. When would you say you came across like this path? Like when did you start reading Jung or Nietzsche? What was the impetus for that?
Yes. Uh, you know, much like many other young men, I heard of this guy named Jordan Peterson, and I saw all of his lectures. And I don't really listen to as much as to his political content because he started doing that maybe in like 2020 2021. Like his earlier lectures on maps of meaning, on personality, that stuff is just like incredible. Like I've never seen a lecture like that. I mean, ever. I mean, and that's kind of what I aspire to do with my YouTube videos is find information that's useful for people in multiple different fields and combine it together like he did. And that really inspired me to see that description of religion in terms of psychological implications. So like here's a story of Moses. He goes out into the desert. What does the desert mean? All right? And what are its implications? So then we say, okay, here's how we extract the morals from that tell us what we should do. And that essentially is what I'm trying to do is into philosophy. So this is why I really like Nietzsche, by the way, is because Nietzsche said that essentially a philosophy is useless if there's no implication for action. And, I have some quibbles with that, but I think I actually generally agree that if your philosophy is just endless speculation, that, that there's no use. It's like are you building great things? Like, are you building a family? Do people like you? Those things matter, not necessarily, this um this incisive, just incessant desire to understand metaphysics, which may or may not even have any meaning. Does that make sense?
Sure, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think that deep down, somebody who, well, in our time, we do have this challenge of the myths having fallen away. A lot of the myths just don't have the same grasp over us. And so a lot of us, it sounds like you and me, anybody who ends up listening to Jordan Peterson's maps of meaning, they're looking for something. They're looking to try to like understand, it's this meaning making and this purpose. And deep down, I think what I want, at least, is to live a life based on some values, something that I really hold to be true, so that even when outside forces try to push me in a different direction, like as a person, I can stand firm to those values. But unless you go exploring for them, a lot of times, you just inherit them from your society, from your culture, your religion, your family, whatever it may be. And if you don't go trying to figure out exactly who you are, then the world is happy to tell you who you are. They'll just like force you
Yes.
to comply with whoever they are. It's interesting that you bring up Jordan Peterson and Maps of Meaning, because I actually agree with you entirely. Like when he gets into political stuff, a lot of the political stuff I just kind of check out. I think he's kind of off the path there. But when it comes to the psychology stuff, those early lectures, Maps of Meanings was huge for me. And in particular, his explanation of Pinocchio, that like
Yes.
completely changed how I saw everything.
Yeah, no, same. That it just totally changed my entire perception of reality. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, and it changed the way that I saw my childhood. It changed the way that I saw myself, my relation to my family, my relation to the world. And then after that, every other book, story, movie that I ever saw, it suddenly came to me in a different way where I could see it. I just started doing that analysis myself. And I think that's what you're doing on your YouTube channel as well. I think maybe that's why it connected.
Yeah, exactly. That is, I would say that is, I feel the same way with the Pinocchio thing. He also did an analysis of Lion King, which I thought was pretty interesting. So I actually recently posted a new video where I'm talking about the Matrix, and the whole thing is, it was actually my first attempt to really do what Jordan Peterson did with Maps of Meaning, but in my own way, and to try to essentially dig into something that is so deeply embedded within our society and figured out why it is that that is the case. And I've done this kind of a little bit with, like, I have some earlier videos where I talk about like Inception or Fight Club. And the reason why I choose these things is because, so there's something that Carl Jung said. He essentially said that, I can't, I'm paraphrasing here. I don't remember exactly what he said, but he said something along the lines of, you don't choose your myths, they choose you, which is why he disagreed with Nietzsche, saying we should create our own values, of course. So then there's a question. It's like, okay, why is Fight Club? Why is The Matrix? Why is maybe even something like American Psycho? Why do they stick in society? Why do people repeat them over and over and over again? Clearly, something is important. And to me, figuring out what it is there that's important, and figuring out what we can learn from it, what we can maybe change from looking at the critiques that it provides, is something that's totally invaluable and really lacking in the vast majority of society. There's no introspection into how we should look at our myths to move forward in that way. And I think that someone needs to do it, and I guess unfortunately it has to be me. Or fortunately,
Unfortunately
depending on
or
how you look at
fortunately,
it.
it actually, when I do that similar kind of thing with stories or movies, it's actually pretty fun for me. But then the
Well,
fact that you're at
I find it fun, but I hate demystifying something, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. The stories that I do that with is one is The Lion King, and I probably picked a lot of that up from Jordan Peterson. But the other one that really jumps out to me is Peter Pan. I think Peter Pan is so insightful
Yes.
for our culture and our, time period. Do you have like a high level philosophy around why certain stories stick, and why you were saying we retell them?
That is a really good question. I actually do not. But if I were to answer such a question, this there's it I would say stories that stick are true in some way, because if they're true, you can't just dismiss them and shoot an argument at them, and that will just totally disintegrate them. And oftentimes you can actually tell if something is too true if people actively like respond to it like viciously, because what that means is that because if you conceive of if you conceive of humanity and say a society as a meta narrative, the narrative is predicated on certain foundations that people tell themselves to continue moving forward, right? So there are smaller ones and there are bigger ones. Say at the societal level, it might be something like we believe in freedom. So if you were to throw a jab at freedom that was actually true, it would cause a lot of people to get really angry, because it doesn't just uproot their what you know it doesn't just uproot what they need to do for making like a sandwich in the kitchen, or what they need to do at work. It uproots everything, and it says, oh, I have to rearrange the entire way that I saw things. So I think that would be a way that I'd go about assessing, I guess, the validity of these types of claims. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think I agree with you on some level. So you're talking about these narrative structures that kind of they dictate how we see and experience the world and how we understand it. And I think that with those structures we have this conscious experience, like very Jungian, right? There's a conscious experience and there's an unconscious experience. And when you come up against a story, I think a lot of the times the experience you have with the story is actually unconscious to you, or it's connecting with your unconscious. And so a lot of the times we enjoy a movie because of the way it makes us feel, the emotions that we experience, kind of the maybe bits of inspiration we receive, or maybe sometimes in a movie when it's sad enough it's kind of soothing for us, so we have this emotional experience with it. And then what ends up happening is we enjoyed it. And so our conscious self has to come up with the reason why we enjoyed it. And oftentimes I think that conscious reason misinterprets the story or misses the point. So I mentioned Peter Pan before. Peter Pan is it's like a beloved story. We all grew up on the cartoon. It gets remade all the time, and kids in school do like the Peter Pan play, um and everybody seems to love this idea of Peter Pan, and kind of the main theme being that we never have to grow up.
Yes.
But I think in when I read Peter Pan and I actually look at the when I break it down and look at the different characters, the archetypes they might represent, and what's actually being said in the story, the book of Peter Pan is actually about the necessity that we grow up. It's like you have to grow up. And if you can grow up in different ways. You can grow up and become a pirate, or you can grow up and become like a whole adult who can still appreciate the childlike side of life. But to not to get into Peter Pan too much, but we come up with these like reasons why we like a story, reasons why we enjoy it. And but I think what's actually happening is that our unconscious is connecting with it, because there's something in that story, like you were saying, there's a truth in there. And if our unconscious can bring that truth to consciousness, then it can help us grow. It can help us mature, individuate, heal, whatever it is. It can help us become adults, become more conscious. And I
Yes.
think for the most part, people miss that underlying truth, because once the ego becomes aware that you like something, the ego comes up with a reason why it's likable.
Yes, no, I actually I totally agree with all that, and I think I may have arrived at a better answer to your question, as you said, as you say all that might make more sense. All right, Stranger Things was just released. Um, Now
Yeah,
let's just
my
not
wife
talk
and
about
kids have
the
been
end.
watching it. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but my wife and kids are, yeah, they're watching it.
Yeah, so commentary aside on the acting, we'll just put that aside. Season one's obviously still always the best. But acting aside, there was a particular scene in there that I think will help to illustrate this point. Actually, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't say it because it might blow it for people who haven't seen it.
Are you talking about
Should I
season
say it?
one?
Season
Yeah,
4,
season
episode
one's been
5.
out. Oh, the new one. No, I haven't seen
Yeah,
that.
maybe not. Maybe I should just keep it. I should just keep it.
Just keep it
You know,
very
look,
general, I guess.
very very general. Okay, you know what? I'll speak about it in terms of Jungian archetypes. So basically, we'll put it this way: there's this character, who knows who, and this character did not have power before. They were just a person. Life was happening to them, and then essentially they were told, you just need to, you've always been attached to the darkness or whatever. So why don't you just say, enough is enough? No, I control it. And I thought it was, again, acting aside, the Jungian archetype was actually of shadow. The Jungian archetype of the shadow was represented by that, but the scene itself represented essentially confronting your shadow. So, again, to correlate it again, to go back to the Matrix, there's a scene in the Matrix, everyone's seen this hopefully, that Neo is being interrogated by Agent Smith, and Agent Smith is obviously the shadow, but he doesn't really confront him. He just flips him off. And it's like, that's not confronting your shadow. That's just saying, oh, I don't care about you. And obviously, it doesn't work well. He ends up getting his mouth sealed, and, he ends up chasing him still for hours later, or, hour and 30 minutes later, he's still chasing him. But then at the end of the movie, instead of just flipping off Agent Smith, Neo turns around to Smith and says, no, I'm going to directly physically confront you. And the connection between these two things is that it's both representing confronting your shadow, but why would that? Because both of those scenes, the scene in Stranger Things season 5 and this thing in The Matrix, are both really impactful emotionally. Because I mean, personally, I assume if I got emotional watching it, like, wow, that's so cool, that a lot of other people did too. Um, so why then? Why? And I think it's because, so there are different ways to enact an archetype. But when you see it enacted at a kind of, I don't want to say meta level, but when you see it enacted, no matter when you see it enacted, if you see it enacted basically perfectly, but in a new way, then it becomes highly salient. So when we say something is like cliche, like, live, laugh, love, or whatever, stuff like that, we say it's cliche because we've seen it before. Because there are certain parts of our brain that essentially adjust, that function as these prediction mechanisms. And when you see that in a household, you're like, oh, I've seen that a million times. Or when someone tells you, oh, you just need to be brave, it's like, oh, great, thanks. That's excellent advice, But when someone says, or when someone acts out how to be brave in a specific way that you haven't thought of before, that simultaneously enacts the universal archetype while doing it in a way that you've never seen before, that makes it highly salient, highly important, very easy to understand, and makes it last longer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. It's pretty much in line with the way I think about memory and how memory works.
Yes.
You had so many experiences throughout your childhood and your early adult life, but the ones that you remember are the ones that happened like one time, or they happened in a
Yes.
way that was shocking. It was different. It was, either extremely fun and pleasant and pleasurable, or it was shocking and terrifying, and so you had this reaction to it, and those are
Yes.
the memories that you actually hold on to, because everything else, like, you can't remember every breakfast you ever ate because you eat breakfast every morning.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was doing some research actually last night on ChatGPT research. So I actually looked at the actual individual research that it showed me. But I was looking at this concept, and I was like, this concept that I have, it's very interesting, and why is it interesting? And I asked the chat, and he was like, oh, you're doing what's called schema. It's like schema breaking theory or something like that. But basically, what it's combining two things that shouldn't be combined. Like if you were to combine Nietzsche and Jesus together and say, oh, these two people are saying the same thing, people would be like, whoa, what? Like, what do you mean? Because that it breaks the prediction mechanism of your brain. And if it's true, then it really sticks with them, if that makes sense. So that's why, like YouTube videos, a lot of them, like there's this very obvious, essentially, I guess, meta framework where you say, most people think this, but I think this. Here's why. So it gives you the normal pattern, breaks it, and then it promises reward. So that I think is kind of a meta reason why a lot of these like unique archetypes that are represented in movie, film, culture, and all that have their salience, because they're our brain is literally wired, like it's literally wired to spike your dopamine. I believe in the ventral tegmental area. You know, the neuroscientists who watch your podcast are going to be all over me because I'm not a neuroscientist, but I'm pretty sure that's where it is. Definitely in the brain somewhere that basically spikes that dopamine, says, "Whoa, pay attention." That's kind of weird. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. It's trying, like you said, it's trying to get you to pay attention. And yeah, it's interesting. So that makes me think about the Matrix, right? And earlier we were talking about why do we like stories, or I'd asked you if you have a high level kind of philosophy around it or thoughts around it. And when you look at stories, whether it's like a religious story or a movie like The Matrix, it makes me think that you can look at almost anything as if it's representing something literal, like it's literally there. So when you read, when you go to a Christian church and they're praying or singing to God, like they literally believe that there's a God in heaven that is in some way similar to the image that's in their head of this God. And so then they believe that the world literally has demons and angels that are impacting the way people behave and the way outcomes of things. But, having read Jung, I don't know if you've read a lot of Joseph Campbell at all, but Joseph Campbell's been really helpful for me in this point as well. But you can take all of that and kind of conceptualize it as a mirror of the believer's psychology. And so then when you take something like The Matrix, it's very easy to literalize it as well. And so this idea that we're all tapped into a machine that's using us as batteries and it's giving us this false sense of reality. There's like this literal interpretation of it. And I think a lot of people probably thought the movie was cool because of that idea, right? And like, what if, and can we escape it? But then obviously there's like a different interpretation of it, which is like more psychological, which is we all are tapped into some kind of collective thing that is draining us,
Yes.
and that it is possible to break out of when you do something like you described Neo doing, turning around and facing Agent Smith or facing your shadow in a way where you say, I'm not afraid to engage anymore. And yeah, I just think it's fascinating, like this idea that you could take anything literally, but you can also take anything and examine it psychologically. And through doing that, you learn more about yourself, and you learn more about the decisions you've made and why you've made them, and hopefully you do gain a little bit of that control moving forward.
Yes. So one of my favorite words is polysemic or polysemy. And for those who don't know, basically it just means that it there are multiple levels that something can be assessed at. So a great story is polysemic, or I'm not even sure how to say it because I've never heard anyone else say it. Polysemic, polysemic, who knows? But
So it's one of those words that you know from reading, I imagine. If you've
yeah,
never,
exactly.
that's a good indication that you're a voracious reader. It's good.
Yeah, exactly. You know words that no one else has ever said. Yeah. But yeah, so polysemy or polysemic, whatever. Any good story is that way. And you're right that religion, a lot of these people, they do have that kind of propositional. They take it as a physical truth claim, right? And I think that's just totally incorrect. Now, I'm not saying that I actually don't believe in a God in heaven, because I do. I just don't think that I have a good visual representation of him at all. And the kind of funny thing about that, I was thinking about this the other day. Most of our, I mean, all of our representations of God are like painted by us. So like your idea of God comes from like Michelangelo. Like it's not even like from the Bible. It's like literally like Michelangelo or like William Blake, who he did the one with God pointing down from the sky that's like yellow. It's really nice. It's got like yellow and black and orange. Really nice painting. But anyways, so you can read things at multiple levels, and you kind of have this issue where if you look at it from a psychological perspective, you could maybe explain that to someone. But if you try to put that in contradiction to the physical truth claim, you're going to run up into some issues. Um, so you have to kind of learn how to say these things. And I don't say this to say you need to be manipulative, but like the way that people understand things is oftentimes not completely truthful to what those words mean. So like a good example of this is like, so this is super well known in psychology that most people, this is going to be a little controversial, but most people, whenever they vote, they're not voting because they're like, oh man, like this particular tax policy, I read every single line and list that, whatever. It's like they're voting because the people that say the things that are, they like, are that's their people. And those words function as like an in-group signal, which is this is why I'm writing my book, because about basically about linguistics, because I'm very interested in figuring out how to contextualize when it is that someone is doing that, when someone's going like, I believe in XYZ political thing, but they're not saying it because they've thought it out, versus when you're talking to someone who is like, yeah, I've looked into the budget calculations on this, that, whatever, and if we send XYZ to the military, we send XYZ to the Department of Homeland Security, then we won't have enough money, because I want to know who I'm talking to, if that makes sense. It's not that I don't respect your opinion if you vote based on the words as a tribal utterance, because that's really how humans have functioned forever. So it's a totally valid way of like operating in reality, because like this is a point that another controversial person, Scott Adams, said, but it's like if you're a Muslim and you're a Christian, you still go to the grocery store. Like, are you like fighting over like Jesus in like aisle 7? Like, it actually, your beliefs and your these in-group utterances are actually so far removed from action that it's not necessarily a problem until you get into some very specific situations that most people are not going to be in that frequently. I know we're kind of going all over the place here with these thoughts, but just what do you think about all that?
No, I don't mind going all over the place. I think it's interesting. Yeah, so yeah, first of all, Scott Adams, like I think he's going through cancer right now, so lots of prayers for Scott Adams.
Yeah, very unfortunate.
Yeah, he's a good guy. People, yeah, okay, so you started off talking about politics and the language of in-group, out-group, and I see that all
Yes.
the time. So one of the real challenges for me, being the type of, I guess, truth seeker that I am, not to say that I found truth, but that I'm always hoping to find it, and
Yes.
I don't want to be satisfied with just like simple answers or groupthink. It's actually really challenging because you don't find a lot of people out there who can kind of, I'm not saying I'm perfect at it. I'm not saying I don't sometimes get caught up in it, but it's difficult to find somebody who is truly kind of an independent thinker. And politics is one of these things that's very obvious for me, where yeah, like what you're saying is somebody on the left will throw out some language about equality and equity and inclusion, and simply because they make the group of people who those values are important to, they make them feel good because they're repeating them, then they go vote for them. And the same is the true for the right. They talk about small government, they talk about God, they talk about securing the borders, and then all of a sudden, they have that same kind of feeling of like, yeah, this is the person for me. And then once politicians are in office, they're just like, that's not even at all why they're there, is to do these things. In fact, I think a
Yeah, that's the
lot of the
funny part,
time,
right?
yeah, they know the buzzwords.
Love how that works.
Yeah, they know what you want to hear. And so that's what gets you to the ballot boxes. And yeah, it's an interesting thing because so I think like you were saying, I think it's the way that the human brain is wired. I think we are genetically adapted to agreeing with each other on big ideas and just kind of accepting that because we share a reality, this unconscious collective that we all kind of operate within. It's difficult because when you see it and it's painful, but at the same time, it's literally the thing that has allowed our species to conquer the world and be the most dominant technology driven species. So we have all these amazing things because of it, but it's also, you can see also if you look on a broad scale when it comes to religion and geopolitics and all these things, it's also one of the things that hurts us so much because we're constantly in conflict with each other. And for those people who are out there who are bad actors, it's so easy for them to use that against the masses without most people in the masses understanding that they're even being played or tricked.
Yeah, Plato said that whenever the men of words get into power, you better watch out because they're not men of action. They're just trying to get more power. I think actually Eric
Yeah.
Hoffer talks about that too in True Believer, another really good book. But I was so since we're going down the politics rabbit hole, I was doing some research about persuasion because there's a problem that I really want to help solve. So oftentimes, like we're saying earlier, we have these people who express these kind of political utterances, and you need to know if it's because they want to explore it in a kind of the manner of the logos, one might say, or if they're just saying it just to figure out if you're in their tribal group. And I hate to sound universalist because I'm actually not really a universalist. I mean, I'm a universalist at heart, but I understand that it's totally impractical for physiological reasons and environmental reasons. However, if you have, so let's say you're at the dinner table, something I saw a lot of, and it actually kind of made me sad. I saw a lot of these posts on Instagram saying like me when I talk politics at the dinner table on Thanksgiving. And it's like, haha, like it's kind of funny, but like, do you really want to go into like your like family's Thanksgiving, just like talk about like very extreme politics? Like it's okay for you to have extreme politics, but it's actually not okay for you to go into your family's Thanksgiving and just like totally ruin it for everyone because everyone's getting all emotional and freaking out over, whatever statement you said. What I want to do is I want to like to at the very least unify the family. We don't have to unify with everyone. We could but unify with your damn family. That's really important. So then how do you do that if there are family members who are like radically different than you? And how do you do it without agreeing with them while directionally making them feel good? And I ran into this thing. I think Scott Adams has actually talked about this. It's called the high ground maneuver. It's something that like a lot of business CEOs and stuff have practiced. But essentially, what you do is because remember, we're all seeing things through this certain lens of perception, but there are levels of perception that we can kind of all agree on. So then you say, someone says something like, let's make it like explicitly political. They say something like, I believe that we should continue letting in like tens of millions of immigrants. Now, so if they say that, how do you, if say you disagree with it, how do you avoid responding to it without saying that, you disagree? Because you don't want to make a big argument at the Thanksgiving table. You want to avoid that as much as possible. So you do this high ground maneuver where you say, yeah, it is crazy that there are all these people who live in these horrible places. Like I wish that I wish that their country was better or whatever. That one, now that's not completely perfect, but it's good enough to where like you agree with them emotionally, so you validate their frame of perception. Because you have to remember, frames of perception are built in; they're a priori. They're based on your personality, so you're not going to maneuver around their personality while disagreeing with them openly. But if you go up a level and say, "Oh, I agree with human dignity," which everyone does, like literally everyone, then you can kind of avoid it and you can kind of agree with them in a way, but not agree with their propositional statement. Now, you could do that with, statements on the right, statements on the left, but the point is to figure out a way to appeal to a higher value to maintain peace at the table.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's worthwhile. It is a shame that you can't just talk about it, but obviously, and I've seen it not in my not in the family that I've created, but in my extended family, I've definitely seen some blow ups at holidays over just
Yeah.
silly topics that like we have opinions on, but none of us really have any influence in, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing too, right? It's like you have no influence, so why do you care? Like that's something that so, just to briefly interrupt you here. I was actually a journalist in DC for like a year. And like once you see like the inner workings of what goes on up there, you're like, "Oh my god, like this place is just a total cesspool. Like it's all influence here, and like everyone pretends like they're like the good guys and it's like none of you like you're all activists. Like you all have your frame of perception, and I'm not saying that you're right or wrong because I think there are valid perspectives from each side. So that's fine that someone's a leftist, someone's a rightist. But what's not cool to me is whenever you say I'm this way, the other way is totally bad, and I'm a good faith actor. When like Clearly you're not. And it's hard to explain this to people who have not been to DC, who have not worked there. So this kind of brings it back to what we were saying earlier, how like, because like when you look at Jungian archetypes, what you're doing is you're kind of peeling back how reality works, the ontology of psychological reality, as we talked about earlier before the podcast started, and you see the framework, right? But it's really, whenever you first look at these things, it's super disintegrating because you're like, oh, like that's not how I thought it worked at all. So now you have to like rearrange your brain to be like, okay, this is, this is important, this isn't important, and you kind of have to like remystify. But like you have to really ask yourself this question, especially if you're like you're saying like you're interested in actually talking about these things, and I am too. But you have to really ask yourself the question: are you willing to go into a conversation and totally demystify something to the point to where it psychologically disintegrates someone for like a week, and like they get all emotional and they have all these issues, and like we don't want to do that, because like for most people it's very difficult to remystify something once it has been demystified, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And the truth is that some people can do it for themselves. Like I think that I've done it for myself just through reading and listening, having conversations with people like you. And it seems like you've been able to do it yourself as well, just because you went and had those experiences and saw what was actually happening behind the curtain. It's like this a lot of people, they only experience life as what they see. They think that life
Yes.
is what they see, but they don't see that life is what they think, and so they just don't understand the actual directionality of reality. And so you can do it for yourself if you really want to. You can go dissolve these ideas. And for me, I've done that in a lot of different ways. Like I grew up very religious and and I eventually stepped away from my religion. And then, after that, it was like this snowball of, kind of like a Nietzschean nihilism, like not trusting any institution until you, you know
Many
what I'm
such
saying?
cases.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but you don't want to be a nihilist, and so you got to kind of figure it all back out. And I think that's part of the reason why I've gravitated towards Joseph Campbell and Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning and Carl Jung and all this stuff. But then there is going back to this idea of like you don't want to create conflict. Say it doesn't have to be politics. It could be politics, religion, economics, all of these things. It could be eating healthy. All of these things in some way create conflict when people disagree, and so you don't necessarily want to go around trying to convince other people that they're wrong, and you don't want to be creating conflict. But you also, something that kind of jumps out to me in the world we live in today is you also don't want to go around intentionally falsifying your preferences. So, what I mean by that is
Yes.
like, if you read like books like the Gulag Archipelago, or you read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, you see the inner workings of these societies that get taken over by these radical movements. And a big part of it is people just going along, people just not stating what they actually think, people not standing up for something because the collective is moving a certain way. And that's what you would call preference falsification. And
Yes.
that's actually a really dangerous thing, especially in a society that's supposed to be free like ours. So I think this idea that you brought up of taking the higher ground, or whatever that strategy is, it's probably really useful because you can achieve both things. You can achieve a non-combatant kind of agreement where you're like, yes, on one level we are agreeing, but I think it probably is important to follow it up with some statement around, but I think the way to handle it is this, even though the other person may disagree.
Yes. Yeah. I get what you're saying, right? So you have to you have to not never speak falsely in a way that is manipulative, because that's actually, I was reading the Bible earlier today. Something that always like sticks out to me is Jesus attacking the Pharisees, because he just like totally reams them. Like everyone says Jesus is a nice guy. It's like, dude, read Matthew chapter 23. Like he is destroying the Pharisees. He's like, you're fake. Your morality is total BS. Like you literally just pretend like you're a good person on the outside, but then you go home, you're super resentful. You're just trying to manipulate everyone else. And I think a lot of people do go about doing this kind of preference falsification with that intent. They're acting moral, but really they're not, and they're not acting it out. And I think the solution to that, those people in particular, they just need to be called out, dude. Like, people are afraid to call people out, but like, again, Jesus went to the temples and he made a whip and he whipped people. It's like, dude, this is like Mr. Nice Guy, okay? Like, clearly you could be nice and you can hang out with the downtrodden, and you can, I guess maybe even feel pity for them. But when someone is acting wrongly and you're in a position to where maybe it'll cause some social ills or whatever. Like, if it's wrong enough, I think it is basically, at this current time in our society, it's basically time just to be like, no, dude, actually, like, you're being a bad person. Everyone knows you're being a bad person. Like, just stop. And that's not a high ground maneuver at all. That's like really like aggressive. But, this is something that, have you ever listened to P.F. Young, by the way?
No, I don't know P.F. Young.
Okay, I recommend him. He's very interesting. So P.F. Young talks about, he has a series of videos where he says logic is, fake, basically. It's not exactly what he's saying, but what he's saying is that people get your vibe. So, and if you want to influence people, logic is very stupid. Like, it is like, if we could list like 100 ways to influence people, it's like 100 on the list. Like, it's not a good way to do it. It's only good to do it to people who are interested in that type of what I like to call the logos game, which is extremely small. So you can throw facts and logic, so to speak, into your persuasive arguments, but they're persuasive arguments at their core. You need to know how to persuade people, how to convince them that your point of view is good. And the best way to do that is to be a good person, is to like be likable. It's like to be like a person who's like, yeah, I look up to him and I want to emulate him. Like, no matter how you feel about Elon Musk, he has changed politics forever, without a doubt, like in indescribable ways. And why? But why? How is he able to do that? Well, he became a billionaire running 7 different companies, working 110 hours a week, sleeping on the floor of his factory. And people look at him and they're like, I want to be that guy. He's cool. Like, he sends rockets to the moon. He can do like satellite, like orbit calculations in his head. So then whenever he starts speaking about politics, people are like, oh, well, like, it's a little aggressive, but at the same time, he sent a rocket to the moon, or not to the moon, but he sent a rocket to outer space. So like, that, he's got some riz to him, some bravado, something that's cool that you like, that makes you kind of want to pay attention, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes me think of good faith actors versus bad faith actors. And so this idea that you're talking about where the first way to try to influence somebody or persuade them is just to show them that you're a good person. So just it's like going back to this idea of the unconscious. There's some part, just some interaction that you have with them where they make you feel good just by interacting. So it may be that they're just very friendly, they're
Yes.
inquisitive, they're kind, they have manners and they're polite. And that just makes people feel like, oh, this is like a genuine person, this is a good person. And so it's that unconscious side of you. The thing with politics today, and not just politics but also just media, people in the media, whether it's like the traditional kind of legacy media, which is, it just feels like just completely overrun with bad faith actors. And then
Yeah.
even in the kind of the new internet media kind of podcast and, Substack world, there's a split where some people do come across as good faith and some people come across as bad faith. I think I would agree with you where when you see the bad faith actors, you have to call them out. But the thing is that like when you go to Thanksgiving dinner and you're sitting across from your sister-in-law, you may disagree with her, but like she's just a regular person in a regular job. She has
No,
no
yeah, and and
influence,
and
no
and, and just
control.
for the record, I would not recommend calling your sister out. That's not what I'm
Well,
saying.
that's
But keep
that's what
going.
I'm getting to is like you might disagree with her and you might think that, or if it's your brother-in-law or if it's your uncle, whoever it is, you may disagree with them, but they aren't, I wouldn't consider them like bad faith actors because
No,
they're
not at all.
just people who have their opinions or they have their news source. And whatever their
Yes.
news source is, whatever they're consuming, that's just their worldview. That's what they think is real. And so there's no point in calling out that person and getting angry with that person and fighting with that person, because neither one of you has any influence. But when it comes to people who have large audiences, it comes to people who have actual power, who are in actual offices, when you see them being bad faith, I think it's very important to call that out.
Yes, for sure. And I think a lot of people confuse epistemological, let's say, inaccuracy or shoddy epistemology for bad faith acting. And, no offense to everyone who thinks about politics, but, they basically all have bad epistemology. It's something that you learn as a journalist because it's when you're a journalist, like, you actually, although there is a lot of like, there's some linguistic games you're playing for sure, but like you can never actually say something that like didn't happen. However, you can misrepresent it in such a way that when it is read untruthfully, and then the person who says it doesn't investigate, so their epistemology again very shoddy. But that doesn't mean they're bad faith. It just means like the average person just like isn't gonna like look at their news story and be like, you know what I need to do? I need to like look at every single detail of this and see if it like matches up with reality. Because like to do that, it's gonna take like hours and hours and hours, and it's like no, like no one's doing that. Like that's not the case. But however, when it comes to like a major political actors, it's like, buddy, believe me, they have done the research. Like they have consultants, every single aspect of this. Like there are these, you know of experts like Scott Adams who are probably talking to him and saying, hey, I know this fact, this fact, this fact, this fact. If you place this fact up here, it'll be perceived this way. This fact down here, it'll be perceived this way, blah blah blah. So those are the people that you can really like. I think that it's more appropriate to call out, and that Jesus again would crack the whip on them. And I think that's what people like a lot of people misunderstand about Jesus and even like the hero archetype as a whole, that it's not about, you're not heroic for going after every single person who says something wrong. It's like it's actually oftentimes like super counterproductive because you're just throwing these narrative bombs that are emotionally disintegrating or physiologically even stressful, and that's not helpful. That's not very helpful at all. But it is helpful when a local politician does something really messed up, and then you say, you know what, I know some of the details of that. Then you go to a journalist and say, hey, guess what? Guess what this guy did? Like that's helpful to call out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I think it's fascinating that there are so many people who have actually come across in this kind of Jungian philosophy, psychology, kind of esoteric mysticism, like peeling back the curtain kind of space, who still fall into like leaning politically in certain ways that are surprising to me. Because for me, for one, I think that when it comes to a discussion of politics, it's in the same way that when it comes to a discussion of religion or any other topic, it's actually more interesting to analyze it than to
Yes.
argue like your opinion about one thing or the other. And yeah, and it's interesting how much, I mean, I think it's just the way again that we're wired. It's our brains being like this collective species, being like a social species, and really needing the group for safety and security and for your livelihood. So you unwittingly, I think people just are always looking for that tribe that they can be a member of. Uh, and so it happens to everybody. I think that, I don't know, it just surprises me sometimes when people want to argue more about specific policies rather than analyze the broader picture or the characters or what they're actually saying or what they do after they say the thing that they say. It's
Yeah.
just more interesting that way.
Yeah. I agree with you because, I actually have like, I kind of wanted to be a political commentator at first, but then once I realized, like, number one, I don't want to die. Number two, like, and I laugh jokingly, but that actually did happen. And if you say anything like, because what I was saying earlier, that basically if you say things, and me personally, I would say things that are like crazily like narrative breaking because like I want to actually look for the truth, but like what does that get you? And maybe there will come a time where I will like shift into that, but I think that deconstructing the narrative to that high of a level where you're throwing those types of bombs. Maybe it is useful. Maybe someone does have to fall on the sword, so to speak. And that's why I said earlier it's okay to have extremist politics, because like I look at those guys, I look at them two ways. For one, they meaningfully push the narrative forward in the way that the mainstream does not at all. And they tend to say things that are more true. And maybe they dive into some conspiracy theories sometimes, but it's weird because they simultaneously are saying things that are like super true, but then things that are super false. But then you move towards the middle and it's like it's whatever maintains the status quo, which is often like more false than it is true. So I think the extremists are actually kind of onto something there. But at the same time, the extremist ideologies like, red pill, kind of some sections of the new right, maybe like wokeness is hardly even extremist anymore, but like maybe like super radical feminism or whatever. I look at all of that stuff as just shadow projection. Like that's all it seems to be to me. It's just like whenever, I'm writing a script right now, and I like to pick on the red pill guys a lot, but the reason why I like to pick on them is because I'm a man, and it doesn't. If you're a man like talking bad about feminism online, it's like I don't think that's necessarily a great look, even if I don't agree with some of that stuff. But if you're talking to men though, as a man, I think you actually have more of a chance to influence them. So like if you're a woman, I suggest that you talk about that, not to be the stereotypical man tell a woman what to do. That's kind of funny, but so I'm a man talking to men, and I say, hey, look, you red pillars. You say something like, oh, like, I don't want to sleep with that girl. Like, she's just interested in looks. Like, because, like, one of the big things in the red pill and the black pill is this thing called Chads, which your audience may or may not be familiar with. Essentially, it's just this guy who's like super beautiful, 6'4", like, you know, chiseled, whatever. And they say, oh, like, only Chads get laid, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, do you actually believe that? Or like, do you think that women actually believe that? Like they only go after Chads? Because like the statistics on this totally disprove that. Or is it just you that only wants to go after the very attractive woman? And it's like, hey, look, fair enough. I do too. Like I actually do want to go for like the 8, 9, 10 woman, whatever. But like to me, when they say that, oh, women only look for good guys, they're actually just reflecting their own mind with their ideology. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you gave one example, but I think it runs the gamut of, politics and like cultural movements and, all these social activists. I think most of, yeah. So going way back to Jordan Peterson, I think one of the smartest things he ever said was that unless you can make your bed in the morning, like don't go out and try to change the world. And I think
Yes.
there's a lot of people who don't make their own bed, who don't, and, psychologically even, like they just haven't dealt with themselves. They haven't
Yeah.
cleaned up their own space, and they're out there trying to change the world. But a lot of that is just shadow projection.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the thing with that is that going back to this idea of like bad faith actors, like that's how they use you. That's how they manipulate you. It's just like growing up in like a toxic family that's kind of like the family is orbiting this narcissist in the middle. And what that person is
Yeah.
doing is like assigning labels to everybody and getting everybody to fight against each other and pick on each other so that they can just sit up here and, you know, be in control, have nobody challenge them. And that's the same thing that's happening kind of in the cultural, political, social space, is that there are bad faith actors who are trying to get everybody to orbit them. And then in order to not lose that center space, they just get everybody to fight against each other. It's so obvious like who, what your shadow problems are manifesting as in the real world, what you're projecting out there. And so they just feed you that, and then you go and fight amongst yourselves.
Yes, exactly. And now, like I said though, there's it's a weird kind of dual nature to that shadow, because someone might interpret what we're saying to mean, oh, but like, am I wrong? Like, are all of my criticisms about reality wrong? And it's like, well, maybe some of them are, but maybe some of them are. Like, they are true. And because I think that when we call it shadow projection and ideology shadow projection, well, then you have to ask yourself, why are there like millions of guys following that? So there's clearly something arising from the collective unconscious there, like saying, address me, address me, address me. Now, is it the case, like the red pillars say, that the feminists are all wrong. That could be the case on certain fundamental axioms of their beliefs. And it also could be the case that it's kind of like a call to action, to a call to, again, make your bed, a call to get up. Like, just get up today. Leave your house instead of playing video games. And I know that's like a cliche thing to say, but I think that's a better way of looking at it. Instead of just looking at it as like, oh, my ideology has all the right answers, maybe you should ask yourself, why do I follow my specific ideology? Because the ideology is constraining your perception, and perception, I think, is meant to kind of look at a wide array of things, and as it narrows more and more towards something, things are going wrong. So there's this guy on Twitter. He's like, this is a pretty esoteric reference, but his name is Egan Robot. Many people may or may not know who he is. I believed his pinned tweet is this. It says, everything is monocausal and caused by whatever specific thing I'm on right now. Yeah, it's so funny, right?
Hmm.
Because it's like, I actually want to make a video about this because it's so true, dude. Like, you see like these people that say it's all capitalism's fault. The Marxists, they're like, oh my God, like capitalism did this. And like, one of my favorite things. So you talked about the Gulag Archipelago, I think in the earlier, maybe right before we talked on the pod, but there's a game that he used to play with these guys, basically like the communists basically saying, oh, like, well, like there's not a lot of grain, like kind of crazy how the commissars didn't know about that. And he's like, what do you mean? There's plenty of grain. And it just keeps on going. There's excuse after excuse. And the modern version of this is Cuba. So they'll say like, so someone will say, oh, Cuba is an example of socialism gone wrong, right? And then it's like, oh, that's just because of US embargoes. And then when you go into the economics of that, it's like, wait, but it's not. And they're like, no, no, no. See, you just have the math all wrong. And it's like, look, dude, if your perception is so constrained that everything is monocausal, everything is caused by this one thing, it's like your perception has gone wrong. Like, and to me, when your perception is monocausal, it's almost certainly your shadow coming up and saying, yo, like, I'm here, time to address me. And now people don't think like that, of course, because most people don't read Jung. But I think that that's a fairly obvious thing to me. It's that it's calling to you specifically, and I think for them, they will probably get mad at me saying this, but it's basically saying, hey, look, for them too, specifically, take some damn responsibility, because if you did, if you were like those greedy capitalists on Wall Street who work 80 hours a week, you probably wouldn't have a bad life. It's like, that's something that, especially growing up in a family where, just some brief personal details, but essentially my pops, he worked like 80 hours a week, and he wasn't on Wall Street or anything, but when I was a kid, he worked at McDonald's, and like I saw him like just grinding and grinding away, and then eventually he became he actually went into the finance world, and he was still doing the same thing, like grinding away. And like eventually, we went from like we lived across the street from this house. This is a really unlucky house, but they got robbed like 12 times. I don't know what was in that house. It's like freaking, Treasure Island in there apparently. But we went from that to living in like a pretty damn nice house, and he can buy nice cars now. But it's not like that was handed to him because he oppressed people. Like, he worked like so much. And I think whenever these, like the Marxists, they're calling out these capitalists, I think honestly the real explanation there is that they want what they have. They want to actually be a hard worker. And they say that they don't work hard, but I don't think they truly believe that. I don't think they actually believe that.
You think
Maybe
it's
I'm too
more?
hopeful.
No, but that's interesting because you said they want what they have, and so my mind before you
Yes.
had finished your sentence went to like a material possessions have kind of the cars and the houses and the airplanes, and but you then
Yes.
said they want that work ethic. They want to be able to be. So basically, you're saying they want to be able to be that person, to be the person that could do something like that.
Yeah, well, it's a bit convoluted, right? Because maybe they don't understand that they want that work, but they want that thing, and their issue is, what's it in Timothy, the Bible? It says the love of money is the root of all evil. Now, he's not saying the love, or I'm sorry, he's not saying money is the root of all evil, because that's categorically different than the love of money. So, if you love money, you just want what that money gives you. But if you want money to do things, and to get things and to help other people, that's totally different, if that makes sense. And I think maybe in their mind, they're making the mistake of wanting the thing, but really what their unconscious is telling them is that they want the work ethic necessary to get that thing.
Yeah, I think that's pretty insightful. That's very much in line with what I was saying earlier about why we gravitate towards stories. There's like an
Yes.
unconscious part of us that sees the truth in it that could help us become more conscious. And then you feel that, but you don't have the explanation yet. And so you have to come up with like an ego-driven reason. And man, yeah, when you
Yes.
talk about monocausal, I think the biggest thing right now that I see out there is this Marxist movement, this kind of socialist movement to attack people who are successful.
Mm-hmm.
All of the problems in the world are the billionaires problem, like caused by the billionaires. But it's just so fascinating because we live in a time when the standard of living is for the majority of people is vastly greater than it's ever been. And one of the reasons is because people have jobs and those jobs are at companies and those companies are owned by somebody and the loop just doesn't connect in some way, like the it's monocausal, right? So they're not seeing the bigger
Yeah.
systemic problems that are caused by all the other factors. They just blame it on one thing. But I think your insight to say that that's a shadow projection and then narrowing it down to this idea that what they really want is to be the kind of person who's smart enough, hardworking enough, driven enough, risk averse enough to actually go after something and do it, to be a good enough leader, to be a builder, to be a creator. Fascinating. I think that's really interesting.
Maybe it's a little too pie in the sky, but I think that's a plausible explanation.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's very plausible. Yeah. Um, yeah, okay, Bill. We're over an hour, so I want to give you the rest of your day back to you. But this has been a really interesting conversation. I appreciate you going back and forth with me on. We just went down to every topic that came up, and it was fun to just keep going down rabbit holes. So I appreciate it. If people want to find you, they want to find signals and symbols. Where would they go looking?
Yeah, just go on YouTube, just at Signals and Symbols, and also I am on YouTube or not YouTube. I'm on Twitter as Brandon P. Also, the at is it's the a priorist. I will be changing that soon though to my nickname because it's Bill because it's just so much easier.
Okay,
Brandon, you kind of like stumble over it, but Bill, it's like bang.
Brandon, Bill. Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate it, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, for sure. I really appreciate you having me on. You've been a great interviewer.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye.
All right, have a good one.